This is the last in a series of 4 workshops brought to you by the Alumni Consulting Team and the Public Management Program, both programs of the Center for Social Innovation. Just a quick word about each of them. The Alumni Consulting Team is estimated to be one of the largest pro bono resource providers in the Bay Area and provides an estimated value of more than $1 million in pro bono management consulting service annually to the nonprofit community through a network of GSB alumni and student volunteers. For over 3 decades, the Public Management Program has prepared the next generation of social sector leaders by giving MBA students the knowledge and experience necessary to apply business principles to social and environmental issues. The PMP remains the first and only business school in the nation to offer a certificate in public management. As I said, both of these programs are programs of the Center for Social Innovation, an umbrella organization that's committed to promoting effective and efficient solutions to social problems in the United States and around the world. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, William F. Meehan. Bill is the chairman of the West Coast practice of McKinsey and Company. During his 24 years with the firm, Bill has had extensive experience working with chief executives and senior managers of a wide range of businesses in New York, Asia Pacific, and the Western United States. In addition to his private sector experience, he has extensive experience working with many nonprofits in philanthropy, healthcare, education, the arts, the environment, public television, and economic development. He is on the board of many nonprofit organizations, including the San Francisco Symphony, Philanthropic Research Incorporated, and the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, just to name a few. He currently is the chair of the board for the United Way of the Bay Area. We are proud to have Bill as a CSI lecturer in strategic management here at the GSB and as our resident expert on nonprofit board governance. He has a BA in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University and an MBA from none other than the GSB. In fact, this year marks his 25th reunion from the GSB and as a PM peer. I cannot imagine a better slate of experts to share this issue, to explore this issue with you this evening. So please join me in welcoming this esteemed panel.
Thank you, Julie. I think the real reason I facilitate these panels is that I have Julie get to introduce me once every year or so. I never think more highly of myself than when Julie introduces me. A couple of quick notes of introduction. I'm going to just very briefly introduce our very distinguished panel, and I'll ask each of our panel members to introduce themselves in a little bit more depth when they begin their remarks. On my immediate left, of course, is John Morgridge, who you know probably most prominently is the chairman of Cisco, but also extensively involved in the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors. Next is Kavita Ramdam, who is president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women. And I think we've learned on these panels it's always best if we actually have the leader of a nonprofit represent their point of view on governance in addition to we volunteer board members. And all the way to my, at the end of my left is Bob Fisher, longtime executive at the Gap and now on the board of directors with extensive involvement primarily in environmental nonprofits. I'm going to start out just by asking each of our panel members will be speaking for about 10 minutes each, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions. No need to write them on an index card, but we'll be taking questions till probably 7:15, a little bit longer if you would like. I usually start out of these things with just trying to orient us all with a few of what I call the 9 attributes of best practices for nonprofit governance. And my overarching theme is that if you give me any set of hard and fast rules for nonprofit governance, I will find a nonprofit which violates every single one, which is well governed, and I will find you one that, at least on the face, adheres to those hard and fast rules very well and is not very well governed at all. Having said that, I do think there are a few principles, and I'll just share 3 or 4 of my 9. And perhaps the first one is the most important one, which is I think well-governed nonprofits have an ambitious mission, which is clearly identified. In my MBA class, which now includes about 65 students every year, the MBAs are assigned the task of going to find the mission for a nonprofit and to evaluate it. And in virtually every year, we conclude that probably 80 or 85% of those mission statements for those nonprofits have a significant lack by some relatively, thoughtful criteria. And so I just think it's very hard for a governing body to be effective for a nonprofit if the mission is not clear, if it isn't ambitious, if it isn't something that actually does energize them and the nonprofit themselves. And I think it's one of those things that's perfectly obvious and far too rare that nonprofit boards actually just start with a profound thinking through their mission. Many of the questions you hear about nonprofit governance have to do with the mechanics. How big should a nonprofit board be? Is perhaps the most common question. And the answer is 22 people.
Has that changed recently?
There is no good answer to that question. And I have seen a lot of people have a prejudice against large boards, and I think that there are any number of very, very effective large boards. And again, there are some very small boards, 5, 6, or 12 people that are not very effective. There's no question that larger boards require more discipline, more process. But I have a couple of guidelines. I think all effective boards have a small group of truly committed leaders. If it's a board of 12 or 15, it's probably no more than 3 or 4 people. If you have a board of 15 people with 4 people who are really deeply committed and energized and spend a lot of time, you're a very fortunate organization. If you have a board of 75 or 80, it's probably 12 or 15. And perhaps that's represented in an executive committee. It doesn't always have to be. But for sure, you can identify those people by name. And for me, the test is a relatively simple one, which is for those people, this activity is their number one non-work, non-family activity. And I think that's almost just a minimum test. In terms of how large a board can be, I really don't think there's a simple test. My rule of thumb is that a board can have up to 10 or 15% not active members and still be a vital board. And not active meaning by simple rules of work, wealth, and wisdom. Are they generous personally? Do they help in the development process? Do they bring the skills that they're on the board to bring? Do they show up? Do they care? And you're never going to get, particularly on a large board, below 10 or 15% inactive members, because there's always a few people you've asked on who turned out not to be able to deliver against their commitment, or you made a mistake, or they're 87 years old and it's just more pragmatic to allow them to continue in their role at that time. So I really think that's the simplest test for the size of the board. And there are many boards, performing art boards perhaps most prominently, where for development purposes, diversity purposes, constituency purposes, it makes a lot of sense to have a larger board. It obviously means that you have to have very disciplined committee processes where much, if not most, of the important work of the board is going to go on. And you certainly need an executive committee that's high functioning with that size of a board. The last thing I'll point out is I think effective boards have a process and a systematic way to engage the board in what I call the thing itself. There are a lot of boards you go and you just wonder sometimes what you are the board of. You go through the finance committee report, you go through the nominating committee report, and you go through the marketing report, and you go through this report and that report, and it could be anything. And in fact, most of us are involved in nonprofit because we care deeply about the thing itself. And it could be the environment, it could be music, it could be teaching kids to read, it could be helping older people, it could be any of a range of things. And I think effective boards in a very disciplined way at the board meetings and outside of board meetings, make sure that the board members feel like they're very much in touch with the reason that they're there in the first place. If you're a symphony board member, you want to see a musician or a musician director. If you're on a board helping older people, you'd like to actually spend some time with older people. If you're supporting underprivileged families, you should have a family that's been helped. If you're teaching kids to read, you should have some kids who've learned to read as a result of this program actually come to the board meetings. And I think that will be much more energizing than the next 15 minutes of the report from the Finance Committee. So there are many other things that I think can contribute to an effective board, but those are sort of my top 3 or 4, just trying to frame this. Again, I think we have a terrific panel, and John, we'll look forward to your comments. Thank you.
How many of you are board members of a nonprofit?
Oh.
So we've got a lot of advice. Well, I've always found the financial reports the most intriguing. That by stating that I think that one of the real values of diversity on a board is that different people find different parts of the board activity intriguing. And it's been amazing to me. I think many boards have had kind of a policy of diversification. But within the last, since the spotlight has been put on business, within the last 2 years on the boards that I'm on, and I'm on some national boards, I'm on some university boards, I'm on some local boards, but I would say half of them now, we get a spreadsheet with all of the capabilities listed, all of the terms listed, what their area of expertise is. And I think it's I think that's important because there should be someone that's interested in the financial report and what it indicates and what the budget is for the coming year. Because the quickest way for a nonprofit to get in trouble is to spend money they don't have or spend money that doesn't become a part of it. Last year I was on a national board and I should have known better. They came forward with a budget that was 10% over the prior year's budget. There was no business that was planning to grow 10% in this past year. There just wasn't any. I looked at a board, I'm on a local board that came in with a budget a couple of months ago that had an 18% increase for next year. How many people in the room believe that you can raise 18% more in the coming July to July than you raised this year? I just don't think it's going to happen. And yet, if someone's not interested, guess what? Those budgets get passed. When you speak about the United Way, there's been some real financial challenges. You know, a lot of the United Ways accepted designated giving, but they didn't budget get designated giving, and they got in a lot of trouble because they continued to give out to the top 100 as they had for the past decade, and guess what? The money came in and it wasn't designated that way. It was designated to a lot of other organizations. So I think the key thing in terms of, one of the key things in governance is having a diverse board with a lot of varied interests and backgrounds. And that's true of a business board also. And that raises, in the same vein, almost every nonprofit, the number one challenge is fundraising. And so it's got to be, you have to have a body, a group that takes that on with enthusiasm, because it's a tough job. I think the second thing that's important in board and governance is to be sensitive for change. You know, most of the boards I sit on, particularly the local boards, are products of an inspired individual. And they have a vision, and that vision is the driving force for that group, but change is impacting, and it's impacting all nonprofits. And change always is an opportunity. Most of us don't look at it that way, and maybe in some cases it isn't, I don't know. But in the vast majority of cases, change is a real driver. And I think people who come out of the business world have a sense too and a relationship with change and their ability to translate that and make it functional activity or make it impact within the nonprofit. The last thing I think that is important is I'm amazed in the nonprofit world. I've always been amazed in the nonprofit world at the lack of leverage amongst the kind of industry group. You know, in the nonprofit world, even today, they're basically silos. They're basically silos. And it seems to me that one idea that I would strongly recommend in board governance is that you have the executive director of some other nonprofit on your board, and that you ask your executive director to go on some other nonprofit board. You know, in business, it's almost universal that you're on at least one other board, and the preference is to have at least one or two presidents of operating companies on your board. You look at the board, you look at the nonprofit boards, I'll wager it's less than 10% that have someone who's on another board. And yet I think it's very important because there is a lot of leverage. There are a lot of, one of the easiest ways to improve your capability is to steal a good idea. You don't have to go through any of the pain or agony. It's already been proven. All you do is pick it up and carry it along. And as a board member, I think it's important. It's helpful if you're on a couple of boards, because then you really can do that. You really can steal ideas and bring them and have them apply. And then the last thing I think that boards should be sensitive to, and it's on the same theme as collaboration, and that is that there is leverage in collaboration. In our company, we look at markets and we look at the ecosystem of the market. Who are the players? Who are all the players that are in our space? And then we figure out how we can leverage all of those capabilities so that we get not just a return on the dollar we invest, but we get. Those are my observations. I'll leave it there and pass it on to my colleague.
Thank you, John. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I must say that I was figuring out how my batting average was going to look after John and Bill went through sort of the must-have requirements, and I'm glad to see that so far, at least on John's list, I'm batting 2 for 3. So it's not too bad, even if you consider that I'm thinking about cricket and not baseball. In addition to being here amongst an unlikely group of similar people, I like sitting amongst lefties, and I'm sitting between two, and I'm one myself. It's a very nice feeling. I'm perhaps the only representative of a nonprofit. Board members who serve on nonprofits here, but as CEO, a nonprofit that not only works primarily internationally, but perhaps the only representative right now who serves both as CEO and as a board member on an organization that is consciously feminist, dare I use that word. And I hope that as I share some of my learnings as a CEO, you might find that there has been some advantages and some lessons learned and derived both from that philosophy and practice. As the women's movement said many years ago, the personal is political, and I would add perhaps also professional. I'm going to talk about the 3 C's that I'd like to share at this meeting, just from my perspective, both as having served on a number of nonprofit boards, but I'm going to speak with my CEO hat on in this few minutes that I have. The first C is communicate caring. For any organization like the Global Fund for Women that works in 160 countries and has 14 board members, 8 of whom live and work outside of the United States, this is a basic requirement. Be able to communicate, and to do so in a way that communicates a concern and a caring and an appreciation of your board members. Sharing information, sending updates, taking time to reconnect when you actually see each other is not just nice feminist practice, it also turns out to be extremely effective for making sure that the work happens. So some examples of what I found to be very helpful in this regard. Part of what Bill referred to, the Global Fund actually not only manages to bring the people whom we serve through our grant making to visit and meet with board members, but in fact, we have, as board members, representatives from those organizations themselves. So the women who are on our board from developing countries are often either former grantees or members of our broader advisory council. Some things that we do to try and make sure that we stay in touch during the time that we are far away from each other. We meet only twice a year. The board meets twice a year because they have to fly in from many different parts. I provide the board with monthly email updates as CEO. I make a special effort to share special accomplishments of the staff and of individual board members. Recently, one of our board members was nominated to a fairly significant and senior UN position. She was very shy about sharing this news, but I was in a position to be able to share that news with the board more generally and with our staff. That was something that was an appreciation of caring. Gestures of appreciation. Again, maybe this is unique to a women's organization. I would argue that it's good practice for nonprofits. People who serve on your boards do so at no cost for the most part, except, as both Bill and John mentioned, a deep interest and commitment to the issues. It doesn't hurt to show your appreciation. Send flowers to the board member who spent extra hours helping you complete your strategic plan. Offer a gift certificate of appreciation when somebody has taken the additional time to work with staff on a particularly difficult budget review process to make sure that you weren't presenting an 18% growth rate or whatever. Small gestures like that don't cost a lot of money, but they do communicate caring and concern, and I think that they can be very effective ways in which you can sort of build a community on your board that really makes a difference. A few other examples that we use at the Global Fund, because many of the people who serve on our board are not in fact wealthy philanthropists themselves, and yet they work as board members on an organization that gives away over $5 million a year in grants to women's rights groups. We offer outgoing board members the chance to award a grant of their own to a group of their own special concern or involvement as a gesture of trust and respect. It has to meet Global Fund criteria, but it is something that they can make to a group of their own choice. We've also made a special effort to link alumni board members so that people who go off the board also receive updates from myself as a CEO, ongoing information about what key decisions have been made by the board, opportunities to come back and reconnect with people who they've had connections with in the past. And that's proven to be very helpful. My second C is constructive criticism. One of my best lessons as a relatively new CEO on the Global Fund's board of the Global Fund for Women came from a comment made maybe 3 years ago by my board chair, Jacqueline Pitenge, who's a leading feminist in Brazil and has been on our board as board chair for the last 2 years. She asked, why is there so much applause at Global Fund board meetings? Is this an American practice? And then initially I wasn't quite sure what she meant. And then she went on to explicate that she felt that does the staff feel that we as a board are simply here to listen to our multiple achievements and to applaud them? Because, the reports that John was talking about, we don't see them except twice a year, and we sort of feel we have to roll out our multiple achievements in this, that, and the other, the development report, the marketing report, all our fabulous materials. And there is this sort of environment then created in which sort of the board members have to sit back sort of with glazed appreciation and then sort of applaud at the end of it. She urged us to think about a different design. She said, such a format of a board meeting makes us feel unable to listen to what it is you really worry about. What's on your mind? Where do you need our help? Where is our expertise going to be helpful to you? And I think it changed for us as soon as I could hear that, not as, it's a critique of how we run the Global Fund, but really from a place of, this is constructive criticism that could really help us run these meetings in a much more effective way. I think we were able to change our board meetings around so that we were able to get the best value of the time of the board members, who in fact do have extraordinary expertise on a number of different issues, and could have been a resource to program staff and others, and fundraising staff and finance staff, had we really been able to go and say, we're working on this naughty issue, and we'd really like to spend a couple of hours talking with you and getting your feedback. So constructive criticism, something that you should be both willing to hear as a CEO without your defenses up, which is, I think, an initial reaction of many of us because we think we work so hard at these nonprofits and we just want our accomplishments to be on review. But also being willing to provide constructive criticism when we feel that might be necessary in terms of kind of board performance and their ability to respond to issues. And my last C, courage of conviction. Non-profit organizations have often been referred to as the independent sector, independent, that is, of either government or the private sector. Our do-good hats require us to work from a place of high moral conviction, where we place a high premium on certain principles and values. At all times, but maybe particularly in these times, where patriotism is defined by lack of dissent, and where we defend liberty by detaining people indefinitely, it should be, I believe, the role of a board of trustees to demonstrate and embody core values and the courage of their conviction, which goes back to the issue of a clearly defined mission. If, in fact, you are an organization whose mission it is to see the world as one entity shared by all of us, then it must be the board that lives up to that courage and demonstrates and embodies that courage of conviction. And then in turn enables that to continue to have the nonprofit feel that its mission is clear and consistent even through difficult times. At the Global Fund, we have found that the wisdom of that collective conscience, if you will, that is housed in our Board of Governors, has really served us well, resulting most recently in a thoughtful and very balanced statement on world affairs that helped us negotiate and navigate relations both on the one side with 2,000 grantee organizations in 160 countries, many of which were not feeling particularly warmly towards the United States or organizations based in it in recent times, and at the same time to balance and negotiate and navigate our relationships with a primarily U.S. donor base who were seeking to engage with the rest of the world in a manner that was both respectful and non-defensive. And I think again, in this, we were helped greatly by being able to look to our board to demonstrate the kind of courage of conviction and clarity of their understanding of the mission of the organization. And I felt, again, in my role as CEO, that was a place where I had much to learn from sort of the collective wisdom of the board. Thank you.
Bob?
Thanks, Bill. Bill was a couple years ahead of me here at business school, and I guess one of the big regrets I have is not going to work for him after he recruited me to McKinsey, but we all end up on the same panel anyway. So. I was a 1980 graduate of the business school, and I left business school and had no nonprofit experience. And I was lucky enough to be invited to go on the board of the Bay Area Discovery Museum, which is over on the Marin County side of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was the first board experience I had, and it was a great experience. It was a startup board. It was a local board. It was small. there were older mentors available for me, which was a wonderful way to break into the nonprofit world. And I think that as board members join, it's critical that they're indoctrinated into the board and the way of that particular board, because there's a lot of culture in each and every board that's made up. And I gained some development experience, which is critical, as all of you know, for any board, and work through a capital campaign. In 1992, I was invited to go on the board of the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, which is a national policy and advocacy environmental organization, and I had no environmental background at that point in time. But I did have an unrecognized passion, and I think passion for a board member is a critical component. That board, just for all of you, is about 40 members. 25 attend the meetings, and 6 to 8 do most of the work. So it's not that different from some of the things Bill talked about. And I headed a committee there looking at institutional strategies. I was really brought on the board because there were few business voices on that board, and they felt that they needed a different perspective. And John spoke a bit earlier about perspective. And it was through that I began building knowledge around the issues of the environment. In 1996, I went on the board of the Golden Gate National Park Association, which is a local board involved with support for the GGNRA. There are about 30 board members there. 10 do most of that work. I've been involved there in strategic planning. And in 1999, I joined the board of Conservation International, which is an international group that is working to protect the Earth's biodiversity. I've been involved with the long-range planning there. There are about 40 board members, 20 attend, 10 do most of the work. So through my experience, I've found that I wanted to give you a little background about where I've been. And the work I've done has mostly been institutional in nature and organizational and planning and focus. In terms of board governance, I guess I'd just like to start out by saying that good governance starts with great people. And in the end, if you have great people on your board, it's a pretty obvious thing. And those great people need to be harnessed. Their energy needs to be marshaled. But if you start out with the right raw material and you can motivate that raw material through leadership, I think you're going to have a great board. Kavita mentioned her 3 C's. I have, I guess, six E's that make up the personal qualities that I think are necessary for a board member. And many of these are obvious, and they're true for nonprofit boards as well as business boards. Ethical. Board member must be ethical. They must be energetic. They must be endowed well. They don't have to be, but that's certainly a benefit to the organization. They must be empathetic. And there's a big difference between a nonprofit board and a for-profit board, and the way that the board members relate to the institution. I think that I was reading an article about the sort of the ineffectiveness of business leaders when they serve on nonprofit boards. And I think it's very important to distinguish between the way that you approach a nonprofit board and the way that you approach a for-profit board. Because the people working at the not-for-profit board are there for very different reasons, generally, than the ones that are at the for-profit board. And the 2 last E's are effectiveness and expertise. And I really feel business experience is a very important quality. And John talked about the understanding of continual change. And certainly in the world we live in today, all organizations need to continually reflect and look at themselves and how they can change to make themselves better. Concerning board governance, I see that there are sort of soft issues and there are hard issues. And the soft issues involve the feel and style of the board. Bill talked a little bit about the size and the makeup, and there's no right size. But I think that the board has to reflect the chairman. The chairman has to be a strong leader of that board, and the executive director or president of that institution. And the communication and the style and how those 2 people work together has the potential to have enormous impact on how that board is governed. Those 2 people, together with the nominating committee, really shape the board. And again, John spoke about the grid that everybody that it's important to look at diversity of background and perspective as you're putting a board together. Boards can communicate in many different kinds of ways. They can communicate either formally or in a very open fashion. I find the most effective boards are the ones where there's good discussion at the board and not just a series of one presentation after another. If you're going in to listen to presentations, you can really do that today on email or any other number of other ways to communicate. But what the executive director and what the chairman of the board need to do is marshal the talent of that board to gain a perspective on a critical issue that institution is laboring over. And I think in the end, there's two qualities that are you just can't go without are courage and empathy. And again, that sensitivity to the nonprofit world that I talked about. But again, as Bill mentioned, which is really true, a few great people can make a huge difference on a board. Without those few great people, the board will really not be effective, and ultimately I think the institution will flounder. There are other hard issues concerning board governance, and many of these issues are the same issues in the not-for-profit world that we're facing today in the for-profit world. We're not that far away from the enactment of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. I hate to bring that up in any group, but those kinds of reforms are going to be coming down the pike in the not-for-profit world as well. And it's interesting because of all the boards I've sat on, we've had finance committees where we've looked at how we're going to invest the money, and we've looked at the budget, but we've never had audit committees. And I think that from my perspective, having an audit committee, having a control perspective on the board, both in terms of skills as a board member, but also in terms of the way that the board looks at their duties, their fiduciary duties to the stakeholders in that institution. Having an audit committee, I think today is something you really can't do without. And having the skills of understanding accounting and control are much, much more important today than I think they have ever been in the past because of the visibility that nonprofit boards have. In terms of committee structure, in terms of Sarbanes-Oxley and some of the ramifications of that, I think internal controls, code of ethics, it really should go without saying that the people that are working for an institution are ethical. But I think, unfortunately, we've seen with various different scandals that there are times when even nonprofit boards lack a level of ethics that they should have. And so I think we will ultimately be forced to institute codes of ethics, institute certification of the financial reports, and ultimately I think there are aspects of Sarbanes-Oxley that will add to good governance as long as these institutions don't sort of get clobbered by bureaucracy. So we've got to balance the bureaucracy and processes with creativity and passion, and certainly I feel the same way about a for-profit board that I do a not-for-profit board. And if you don't have a good balance, I think that institution will ultimately be in trouble. But in the end, it's about people. It's about great leadership. It's about leadership with the executive director, and it's about leadership with the chairman of the board that really goes about building the board to reflect the institution that